Hello and welcome to Crossfire, the show that dives into the heart of global conflicts, where nations collide, alliances shift, and lives hang in the balance. On tonight's show, we tell you how Bashar al-Assad's war machine was funded by a mysterious drug that could make jihadists feel invincible. Also on the show, we tell you about how a shocking new report which claims that Ukraine was involved in the fall of Assad's regime in Syria. Stay tuned as we break down these critical developments and explore their impact on the future of global power and security. A regime toppled, a battlefield of chaos, and a drug that fueled war itself. The collapse of Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship in Syria has shattered a brutal regime and exposed the dictator's $5 billion drug jihad in West Asia. Captagon, the so-called poor man's cocaine, didn't just line Assad's coffers. It fueled fighters, prolonged wars, and destabilized an entire region. Now, as Assad's grip fades, a dangerous vacuum emerges. Who will control this weaponized trade? And could it spark a new war in the already volatile region? Our next report tells you more.
A pill that fuels terror, blinds fear, and builds empires. A drug so powerful, it erases fear, makes you feel invincible, and turns war into a profit machine. A drug that fueled one of the most brutal regimes in modern history. But what happens when it all comes crashing down? This is the story of Captagon, a tiny pill that became the backbone of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. With the Syrian dictator's regime now in tatters, his multi-billion-dollar drug empire is collapsing, leaving a dangerous void in its wake. Bashar al-Assad ruled Syria with an iron fist for over 2 decades. But his grip on power wasn't just maintained by military force or international alliances. It was also fueled by Captagon. Dubbed as the poor man's cocaine, this amphetamine-based drug became a key weapon in Assad's arsenal. Captagon, once a medical treatment for ADHD and depression, found a sinister new purpose under the Assad regime. It costs mere pennies to produce, but sells for around $20 a pill on the streets. It wasn't just a source of revenue for Assad, it was a tool of war. Captagon fueled fighters, eroded borders, and left a trail of addiction in its wake. Combatants, including ISIS militants, relied on it to stay awake for days, numb their fear, and fight with the terrifying sense of invincibility. Under Assad, Captagon production exploded, turning Syria into a narco-state, producing 80% of the global supply. His regime profited over $5 billion annually from the drug trade, money that flowed straight into funding military operations and maintaining his brutal dictatorship. But no empire lasts forever. Assad's fall from power has sent shockwaves through Syria, and the Captagon trade is no exception. With his regime now dismantled, the once thriving Captagon factories in Syria's coastal regions have gone silent. Reports suggest production has dropped by as much as 90%. But the fall of Assad's regime hasn't brought peace. It's created a dangerous new vacuum. Militias, backed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are reportedly eyeing the Captagon trade as a new revenue stream. Security analysts warn of a looming Captagon boom, with groups like Hezbollah stepping in to take over production in Lebanon. For years, Captagon wasn't just a drug, it was a weapon in the Syrian civil war. It blurred the lines between combatants and victims, turning addicts into fighters and nations into battlegrounds. Assad's regime weaponized addiction to fund its survival. But now, the war has shifted to a new front. So, who will control the trade in the aftermath of his fall? As new players step into the void, the world braces for what comes next. Will this be the end of Captagon or the beginning of a new, even deadlier chapter in the drug's dark history.
What happens when a hidden alliance changes the course of a war? Syrian rebels who brought down Bashar al-Assad's regime reportedly had unexpected support directly from Ukraine. According to the Washington Post, Ukrainian intelligence sent 150 advanced drones and 20 expert operators to aid Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This was done just weeks before their successful advance on Damascus. The secret alliance is a calculated strike against Russia's influence in West Asia. But now the question is, how deep does this shadow war go? For more on this, listen in to our next report.
A dictator toppled, a regime in ruins, and a covert operation that's sending shockwaves through global geopolitics. In a move that's rewriting the playbook on modern warfare, Ukraine has reportedly aided Syrian rebels in bringing down Bashar al-Assad's regime. According to the Washington Post, Ukrainian intelligence supplied drones and experienced operators, giving rebels a tactical edge that ultimately led to Assad's collapse. The report cites Ukrainian military intelligence, known as the GOR, as having sent 20 highly skilled drone operators and 150 advanced drones to Syria's Idlib province. This was done just weeks before the dramatic offensive in Damascus. These drones, while playing a modest role, signified something much larger: Ukraine's covert strategy to destabilize Russia's allies and disrupt its influence across the globe. Bashar al-Assad's 24 years of brutal rule relied heavily on Russia for his survival. In 2015, it was Russian warplanes that turned the tide in Assad's favor, bombing Aleppo into submission and helping him retain power. But in return, Assad became a key pawn in Russia's West Asia strategy, granting Moscow critical air bases and expanding its naval presence in the Mediterranean. Now, that chessboard has been flipped. Satellite images reveal Russian forces hastily abandoning their naval and air bases in Syria. Moscow is reportedly negotiating safe passage for its troops as the Assad regime crumbles. The Syrian dictator himself has fled to Moscow. Reports say that Ukrainian drones reportedly arrived just in time to support a rebel coalition's final push on Damascus. Despite Russian airstrikes attempting to halt their advances, the rebels overwhelmed Assad's forces, leaving Russian allies scrambling and Iranian-backed militias retreating. As Ukraine expands its covert war to disrupt Russia's global influence, the world is left wondering, how far will this shadow war go? And what new battlefields will emerge in its wake?
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is the world's most powerful military alliance. Since its formation 75 years ago, NATO has unified dozens of Western countries under one military banner. NATO has kept its power focused on Europe to take on its one great military adversary, Russia. But since the Ukraine war began in 2022, NATO is threatened by a new opponent, China. NATO is worried by China's growing military power and its support for Russia in the ongoing Ukraine war. And so, NATO is looking for new allies to help it deal with China's rise. That's where India comes into the picture. For the last 15 years, India and NATO have grown closer and closer. We decode this new partnership for you in this report. To understand why NATO and India are working closely together, we have to go back to 2022. Russia launched an invasion of Ukraine in that year, and it received a great deal of military, economic, and diplomatic support from China. That immediately put China on NATO's radar as a potential security threat. NATO's 2022 strategic concept says that China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. The document also pledges to address the systemic challenges posed by the People's Republic of China to Euro-Atlantic security. India shares a lot of concerns about China's rise as well, and this creates an important opportunity for India and NATO. While traditionally wary of engaging with NATO because of its relationship with Russia, India has been quietly engaging with the alliance over the last few years. India's first official talks with NATO date back to 2005, and the partnership initially focused on common concerns like counterterrorism and arms control. Over time, India and NATO have built deeper cooperation, especially in areas like maritime security and cyber defense. Take the Indian Ocean for example. In the late 2000s, NATO and India worked together to combat piracy in the Gulf of Aden. Their collaboration helped thwart pirate attacks and even led to life-saving rescues. And that's just one example of their practical cooperation. From military education to peacekeeping, cybersecurity, and even Afghanistan, NATO and India have had common interests. The rise of China has only increased those common interests.
I think all nations that honor international law shares the same feeling that our nations want to be independent, autonomous in our own decision making, and we don't want to harass others. So all nations like that are more than welcome to cooperate with NATO CCDCA because we all benefit from each of our nations being able to maintain peace and security in our cyberspace. It will benefit our own citizens, but then our computers can't be turned into attack tools by the adversary against other nations. So we all benefit from it.
NATO officials have talked about strengthening cooperation on terrorism, cyber defense, and climate change with India. While India and NATO have different approaches, especially when it comes to Russia, they share many of the same interests. NATO and India may not have a formal partnership, but their cooperation continues to grow. Together, they represent around 2.4 billion people, around 30% of the world's population. And as they share common interests in promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific, they're better positioned than ever to address the evolving challenges of the 21st century. Bureau report from Estonia, India Today Global. That's all we have for you in this edition of Crossfire. You can catch us again tomorrow on India Today Global.